Skilled Carer is here to provide more than just care. We support families, participants, support workers, care teams and the community to understand disability, reduce stigma, grow capacity, promote happiness and achieve dreams. I started Skilled Carer to provide sustainable growth, trust, integrity and education to the industry. We do this by employing reliable and responsible support workers with high integrity and moral fibre. We educate and support them within the industry, and we liaise with families to find sustainable solutions to their lives and facilitate their needs. Our goal is to enable each person we support to live the life they choose. We facilitate our clients' goals, which may be to rejoin the workforce, get and hold a job or career, master everyday tasks, gain ownership and independence, or access community services, as well as anything else they need and are searching for. We provide education through the zones of regulation to help the individual learn and understand their emotions, recognise others, and implement strategies to help them regulate their emotions and reduce behaviours. Really happy to introduce a guest, my first guest. Mikaela has represented Australia 3 times for Miss Australia, most recently Miss Global. She works in real estate development sales at a luxury real estate agency. Being female, her diagnosis was not seen or flagged throughout school or life. And we have been in a relationship for about 4 to 5 months. And it's probably your greatest achievement of the top 3. Despite my education and experience around neurodiversity, it's been difficult for me at times, and it's really pushed me mentally. And this is an opportunity to discuss ADHD, her diagnosis, and how it affects her life openly. And the fact Mikaela offered to do this is what I love about her, putting herself in the spotlight and talking about some really personal things because she thinks it might help others is really brave and really selfless. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So tell us about your diagnosis. How did it happen and why?
It wasn't an easy process, as most people who have been diagnosed in the last sort of 5 to 10 years would probably tell you the same. My experience came from a very dark and vulnerable place through obviously through lockdown. I'm sure that we can all probably relate in that we got to know ourselves pretty well in solitude. We had probably too much time to get to know ourselves, and I guess I just began to see myself in a really raw and vulnerable position, and I guess I hit a pretty dark point where I basically no longer wanted to be here. I had a lot of self-loathing and self-hatred towards myself, and when I started to have those really dark thoughts, it really snapped me into wanting to know why I was in that position and what was making me think those thoughts and causing the habits that I had. So I obviously started to see a psychologist, and we began, to speak through a lot of, I guess, habits and things like that I had developed, and my thought process, and all of that sort of thing. And I hate to say it, but I did turn to Dr. Google a little bit, and I started to get really curious about the choices I was making, why, and things like that. I won't go into too much, that's probably a bit too personal of my previous self. But yeah, I just got curious and started asking why. And then with my psychologist, we sort of, put a few dots together, realized that something was a bit NQR, not quite right. And from there, it was then to a psychiatrist for a formal diagnosis where, it was pretty black and white what I was dealing with.
So what was the process of it? So you were
Yeah.
trolling around on Google for a bit,
Yeah.
questioning things, and
Yeah.
then what? A visit to a GP? or the
Yeah.
psychologist
So
first?
psychologist first,
Yeah.
and then I obviously needed the referral and needed to go through a bit of a checkbox process with the GP, to then go through to the psychiatrist. That was a 6-month wait, so that was pretty tedious.
And
In
this was
that,
during lockdown?
yeah, so a lot of that was through lockdown. I finally saw the psychiatrist only, I think it was February 2022, so February this year. Um, that's when I got my formal diagnosis, and then after that, it was um, back to the GP. Well, I had to find a GP who would actually prescribe the ADHD medication that I required, obviously. So yeah, it was a bit rocky.
And then so you're going through that mental battle,
Yeah.
and then you got a diagnosis. So how did the diagnosis make you feel, emotionally and mentally?
Um, a really big sense of both relief and grief.
Hmm.
So the relief in that, okay, cool, things can change. Maybe I should have a little bit more grace with myself because I'm actually not just crappy at being a human. I'm actually, battling with a brain that doesn't work the same as everyone else. And it gave me a sense of pride as well in being like, okay, cool, look at all the things that I've managed to achieve whilst being neurodivergent and not even knowing it. So, not having the support systems that others who did get an early diagnosis had. So, there was a bit of that and, being proud of myself. But then there was also the grief of what could have been. What what could I have what could what could I have achieved if I had the support systems in place with an early diagnosis as a child? What struggles could I have avoided? Um, what masking habits could I have avoided as well? And I'm working on undoing a lot of those um,
Habits.
habits and masking and I guess ADHD for a lot of people that I've spoken to, and especially for myself, it comes with its friends, which tend to be anxiety, depression, um, all of those other sort of things, and they tend to mask ADHD as well. And some of those things, for me personally, they developed because I wasn't able to go through life with the supports that I needed. So then I was really harsh on myself.
So those emotions of, feeling depressed and stressed and anxious, did they sort of dissipate more once you had the diagnosis? Did then you feel more comfortable and confident
Yeah, well,
generally?
yeah, because I was able to see that okay, my brain works differently. How can I take a different path? And okay, cool. Maybe I can't do things the exact same way as everybody else. What do I need to put in place to still achieve the same results that I know I'm capable of
So,
without thinking I'm not good enough?
mm, I think that's a good segue to, the strategies that you have used. What
Mm,
what have worked? What haven't worked? What's the process been like around that? It's probably been a bit of a journey, um, and I think you're the type of person that will be open to trying different things. Um, and how's it evolved after being female with hormonal changes? Things looking different
mhm.
week to week.
Yeah. So, um, ADHD and PMS and things like that, they tend to go hand in hand. And, um, I did have quite a rough time as a teenager and my hormones and obviously battling with ADHD all at the same time. I wasn't a very pleasant person to be around when I was going through those changes. I mean, not many of us are at the best of times. So
I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, oh, yeah, no. Um, yeah, it's the the tools that I find work best for me are things that they're so basic. It's diet, it's exercise, it's trying to be as organized as possible. Um, Something that really, really helped early on was decluttering, which I know sounds so silly, but we tend to be a little chaotic with the ADHD brain. And I mean, you've seen how much of a mess I can be at times. It's, yeah, we can get a little out of hand. So reducing the amount of belongings I actually had helped with reducing that clutter and that mess, which then clutters my
That's a
brain.
reduction, is it? Is what I've seen a reduction.
Okay, I need to declutter again. Okay, yes. But um yeah, I know I felt that that really, really helped with not feeling like everything was a mess and therefore my brain was a mess and I was a mess. And yeah, so keeping things in order, which can be really hard for us, is much easier when there are less things to keep in order.
And what about your alarm situation? I mean, that's probably one of my favorites.
There are a few extra morning alarms. Well, these are the things I've identified is that, okay, cool. It takes me longer to wake up. Um, so I do tend to try to give myself that extra half hour from my first alarm to my second alarm so that I can wake up, so that by the second alarm, I'm awake and ready to go.
And then your backup alarm is awake. Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a good alarm system. But yeah, I also really love timers while I'm trying to get ready and things like that. So I'll set one of the biggest things for me is time blindness. So an hour could pass, I felt like it's 5 minutes. So I'm often running late, which I'm sure my friends, family, colleagues, yourself can attest to. Um, but I find that setting those little 5 or 10-minute alarms while I'm getting ready just really keeps, I guess, track of time. And I can keep up with, okay, cool, it's been 20 minutes, it's been 30 minutes. This is how I'm tracking, which it sounds so silly and so mundane, but it really helps.
Yeah, it's certainly not silly if it assists you. Regardless of any neurodiversity, I do some silly things that assist me, like my mantras and sticky taped up in the shower.
You do have a few mantras?
What's the hardest thing you reckon you've had to deal with after understanding your diagnosis?
Not believing that it was true. I still to this day really struggle with it. Um, Sometimes I don't like talking about it with people because I don't feel like they believe me. Because a lot of the symptoms are symptoms that everyday people feel. Like,
Emotions,
yeah,
feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling
being
frustrated.
scattered, yeah, having poor memory, forgetting people's names, running late. They're all they're all things that everyday people, neurotypical people do feel on a regular basis. I myself, I feel them on a heightened level, and it's not just sometimes, it's all the time. And it's every single, well, not every single one, but it's all of them basically, rather than just one or two of these points, like feeling depressed or anxious or whatever it might be. It's a whole list of them.
And what are some positives about the diagnosis?
Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned it was a relief, and you mentioned it was, some grief came with that. But I mean, the strategies must be a positive.
the strategies are, and understanding what I need to function every day as a, normal human in society. I shouldn't use the term normal. Normal doesn't exist. Um, but to fit in with the neurotypical world.
Mm.
The world's not made for neurodivergent people. It's just not designed for us. So I do have to add in all of these extra steps. Like, if I don't get my exercise in the morning, sometimes my brain just doesn't function properly. If I forget to take my medication, my brain just doesn't function properly. There are all these little steps I have to add in, and that gets really exhausting sometimes.
What about any apps? Are there any apps that you find useful, or like notes? Do you write things
No.
down, or you use your calendar excessively?
Yeah, Google Calendar. Oh, no, yeah, whatever calendar, whether it's Google Calendars or Outlook, I've always stuck with that because it gives me reminders. Um, that's probably the only digital sort of app or system that I use that really helps. Um, but no, there's not really anything else that I use in that regard. It's just diet, exercise, planning ahead. I actually take a moment if I've got a day ahead and I've got to be at the physio at X time. I want to clean my room. I want to, I don't know, make some calls for work or whatnot. I really have to sit down and break that down. And neurotypical people can kind of just do that on the fly. I get paralyzed and I actually have to write it down minute by minute, hour by hour to understand what's the flow of the day, what's the priority, because I really struggle to prioritize as well. That's just another little thing that helps. So there are all these tools which you can find, my tools aren't going to necessarily work for everyone else who's neurodivergent. Might work for some. I am still finding new ones that do and don't work for me as well. But the difficult thing is that it does take extra time in the day to add these steps in. So to achieve the same outcome as a neurotypical person, it does take me more effort and more time, which sometimes does really upset me because it is exhausting.
So did you do this stuff before you had the diagnosis, or you've?
I started it prior, yes, because I knew that it was
But I mean,
6
even
months.
five years ago, for example, were you doing any of these
No,
things? None
not
of
like
them.
this,
None of
not
them.
like this.
But so since researching it, looking into it, you've tried a few things along the way,
Mm,
and that's kind of just compounded along, and now you've got a few different strategies that work for you.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um, what's the most important thing that you think you've achieved in the last few years since the diagnosis?
Well, it's not even been a year since my formal diagnosis. Um, just to be a better understanding of myself, a better level of acceptance of myself, and really reduced that negative self-talk, which has helped me achieve some really great things. Like I'm seeing really great success at work that I didn't expect of myself. That I've been in real estate for about 6 years, but it's only now with my diagnosis and all these tools in place where I'm actually finding ease at work. And that has resulted in some really great achievements. So since my diagnosis, that's probably one of the biggest ones. Um, yeah.
And what advice would you give to any partners or boyfriends, for example, out there listening that may or not be sitting in this chair,
Well,
to supporting uh, someone with a diagnosis?
I think you've been incredible with your patience with me. Um, I think it's a little bit, do your research a little bit, look into it as well, and see, try to get an understanding of what's going on in their mind. But a really big thing that I think everyone sort of needs to be aware of is, I think they call it RSD, rejection sensitive disorder. It tends to also come along with ADHD. And the best way to sort of explain that is most people work from either intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic is like you might thrive on competition and having people that you want to beat, you want to be better than, which in real estate is most people. But for me, it's very intrinsic. I am my own worst critic. I'm so hard on myself that I don't need other people to be hard on me. Because if other people are hard on me, I really feel that rejection tenfold.
Yep, I can attest to that.
Because I'm so hard on myself already and I'm thinking all of these things and I'm picking at myself and my flaws already. So I guess just where that positive reinforcement is going to help me achieve a lot more than negative reinforcement. I guess that's kind of the only real way I can explain that, I guess. Yeah.
I think, we all have our own personality idiosyncrasies. You combine that with the neurodiversion, every individual is going to be a very individual case. But by researching and looking into it, like you said, you are going to understand it more, and with understanding comes the acceptance and the familiarity and the openness to learn and ask questions respectfully and learn about the other person, regardless of neurodiversion, or that just should be something that you respectfully do, to learn about the other person and understand them in any relationship. You did tell me on our first date that you do have a diagnosis of ADHD. Is it something you tell friends or dates often, or was it because I had experience with neurodiversity that it made you feel comfortable, to trust me with it? Or do you generally just, break the news via a podcast?
Well, yeah, only those who are quite close to me know about my diagnosis. So this is, I feel like it's like my coming out party.
Yeah, well, the viewership isn't great, so at the moment you should be fine.
So I didn't plan on telling you. I never plan on telling people, but if you look into ADHD and a few of our odd little tendencies, one of them, which I can definitely relate to, is oversharing. I think that was probably, I just felt comfortable at the moment and I just overshared. I don't know, I didn't plan on it. And that is probably how I've told most people, is just by oversharing unintentionally. But yeah, I do tend to feel better when I do tell people. But at the same time, I get really nervous that people are going to look at me differently. I didn't want you to look at me differently. And sometimes there are things that I still don't love to point out or bring to your attention, because I don't want you to look at me like I can't achieve the things that everyone else can, or that I need extra help and support, even though I do. But I don't want to be a burden on you either.
We all do, don't we? We all need help and support, and I'm horrible for asking for support and help.
Yes, you
myself.
are a bit. You are a bit. I have to push it upon you. That's okay.
Well, I'm glad you offered to do this, because I don't think I would have asked you.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for someone who's just been diagnosed and is scared or anxious or overwhelmed, or perhaps someone who is thinking about looking into their own situation and contemplating seeking advice or support?
A, do your research and really look into it.
So you're recommending Dr. Google?
Well, there are a lot of, there's other podcasts. Sorry, there are other podcasts. There are experts out there who do provide a lot of free knowledge and resources that can be really helpful while you're awaiting your diagnosis. There's no reason to wait for it before you start taking action and trying some of these skills, because even if you don't end up with an ADHD diagnosis, but you find a skill or a tool that helps you, why wouldn't you explore that? And that's exactly what I did. I actually started seeing an ADHD coach before I even had my diagnosis, because A, it was pretty evident, but also I knew that either way, I had things that I needed to work on and improve. I also really struggled with, the mentality and the thought of going on medication. So I am fully medicated. And that was really confronting for me, because it's just, I've never thought of being someone who has to take medication every day, or, yeah, it can just be a lot to handle and come to terms with and accept. And I got really concerned about how this was going to affect me long term and all that sort of thing. And something my GP said to me, which really helped, was just bringing my attention to the risks of undiagnosed or untreated ADHD and how much higher those negative impacts and risks are than a potential, long-term side effect or whatnot of medication. And I really related to that because I thought, you know what, it's the effects that the undiagnosed ADHD has had on me. It's just not worth, I don't know how to explain this, but I couldn't keep living the way that I was. Something had to change. And yeah, I just came to terms with it. Medication doesn't work for everyone. There are a lot of people who, don't take stimulant medication. There are so many different forms of it. There are natural remedies. There are so many different avenues you can go down. But for me, stimulant medication is just what works for me. And comparing the days that I don't take it and I remember and I feel how I used to feel, I feel sorry for myself for going through life like that.
Well, I think it's important to contrast in order to appreciate the benefits. So we've talked a lot about, both sides of it, but mostly the harder parts. What is the hardest thing about having ADHD as you see it now?
One of my biggest battles is as I said before, feeling like, maybe I don't actually have ADHD. Maybe I'm just a crappy human. Maybe I am just lazy. Maybe I am. Yeah, it's like smart but lazy is typically how we're labeled.
Teachers would label students like that.
Yep.
I'd imagine.
Especially inattentive ADHD, which is what I have. It tends to come with the stigma of being smart but lazy. And sometimes it runs through that negative self-talk runs through my head of being like, nah, you don't have ADHD. You're just smart and lazy.
Daily? Weekly?
Daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least every second day.
And what's the best thing about having ADHD?
I'd probably be a really boring person, Mikaela. It keeps me. I'm spontaneous at times. I'm excitable, and I do find joy in a lot of little things. And I work well under pressure.
Yeah, you are focused and super diligent, and you can create amazing things, with your brand, your creativity, and you can see your passion, oozing from your personality at times.
Can I just stop you? That's when I'm hyper-focused on something. So those hyper-focused moments are great in that I do achieve these really great results, and I do find a really high level of creativity and passion, and I just smash it out. They don't come every day though, and when those times do come, unfortunately, they come at the expense of something else. So often it's eating. I forget to eat because I'm so fixated and focused on this one task, and everything else around me just dissolves away. So in some ways, yeah, some really great things come from those hyper-focused moments, but it is an expense of something else.
Yeah, I see the passion and the care, and it does create great outcomes. You've helped a lot with me and my business. Putting yourself out there like this required a really selfless attitude and strength to be able to open yourself up like this. So it's really admirable, and I certainly appreciate it. And I'm sure there are people out there who may have gained some strength through hearing your journey with ADHD. So thank you very much, Mikaela.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again for taking the time to listen. Stay tuned for further episodes released weekly. If you want to get in touch with me or a support worker from Skilled Carer, please contact us at skilledcarer@gmail.com. Check the website, www.skilledcarer.com, or leave a voice note here. We are always keen on chatting with people about opportunities and learning how we can support you and your family to make your life easier.